by my research that I did as a graduate student on developing Islamic theories in counseling. When I was studying in my graduate studies, one time the professor spoke about Western psychology and Far East psychology, and he jumped over middle psychology. And I'm like, hold on, there's nothing there. Why'd you, what's going on there? He goes, that's what you're going to study, because there's a lack of it. So that started off a journey for me in terms of exploring Middle Eastern psychology. It started off with that. And I realized at that time when I was looking for the research, there wasn't hardly anything there that existed in the resources that I was trying to find. I had to look through loosely translated books, and those were no fun because they were so flowery and pretty, didn't really get to psychological concepts that I was looking for. And there was only a few articles that I found here or there on the internet. So what I ended up doing is doing the best that I could with the resources, and subhanAllah, years later, now we have full conferences, full journals on Muslim mental health. And it's so inspiring to see that. And there's so many more people now who are studying in the field. And so what we have here, what we're going to take a look at, is my research that I did at the time, because I did mostly qualitative research. For those of you who are studying research or taking research methods, you understand what that means. I did mainly research through, again, those books and articles, but I also spoke with ulama, scholars, learned people with these discussions, and used the stories that we hear in the community. So it's really fascinating when we take a look at all of that. So we're going to take, and I'm going to skip a lot of stuff here that we already know as Muslims, because this is a presentation that I also gave at a National Canadian University conference where I was showing therapists how you can take these concepts and apply them to help Muslim clients. And so we took a look at, in terms of, given the importance of the growing importance and relevance here in North America, how the increase of population of Muslims, whether it's through university students coming in or through the refugee crisis we have, the population of Islam is growing in North America. And so given that, it's really important when it comes to having the proper kind of supports through all really supports around, but from a psychological mental health perspective, so that we can give the proper supports for clients. So we can see that, like in the research that I did, there wasn't an actual structured or defined organizational theoretical model for the counseling. And so this lack of methodology is noted in the institutions, but also professionals and also the client themselves. They will see this as, the therapist doesn't understand me, they can't help me. And that's why it's so important to have some kind of model to base that on. So today's presentation, for this part, we're going to take a look at various constructs related to counseling. And these are the things that I'm talking about in terms of what we know. So it'll be a reminder for us, and maybe something new for some of us. So spirituality is a way of life, defining the definition of Islam, looking at the nafs and the parts of the self, free will and choice, balance and development, and fitra. We're also going to take a look at behavior change and how change occurs, and learning rather occurs. We're going to take a look at various goals of treatment and different techniques. Finally, we're going to do a comparison. Those of you, anybody study psychology or come across or anything? Then maybe we'll just, okay, then, we'll do it just for you guys if we have time. We're going to compare different theories or theorists to the Islamic concepts that we're going to take a look at today. Okay? All right. So we know that in Islam, man is considered to be an integral composite of physiological, psychological, mental, and spiritual components, right? And so it's this integrated model that presents Islam as a comprehensive way of life, not just Islam is my religion. It's about encompassing all of that. So from an Islamic perspective, religion is spirituality, and there's no distinction between the two. Like when we do our salah, that's a religious act, but it's a spiritual act as well. So that's what I mean by that. And so they're not, this can also be applied, for example, to science in Islam, where the two are not opposite to each other, but rather they complement one another. So Muslim practitioners propose, and I'm one of those people that also propose, in terms of using the positive aspects of Islam, or rather Western psychology, okay, that complement our concepts rather than go against. So I love how you got a notebook going there. That's awesome. If you guys need pens, we have some in the back if you want to take notes. You can also write on your phone, but you can't use your phone for other stuff, okay? You're in a lecture right now, an academic lecture. Okay, so when we take the Western concepts of the psychological concepts, we'll take the ones that complement the Islamic components, okay? So they don't be at odds with each other. And so essentially we're looking at the spiritual. And that's what I found. A lot of the spiritual concepts in the Western psychological aspects, they complement the Islamic stuff. Because modern Western psychological theories, they tend to focus on one aspect of the self. So for example, psychoanalysis focuses on the unconscious. The cognitive psychology therapy focuses on thoughts. And then behavioral psychology focuses on, obviously, behavior. The newer, more integrated therapies, they attempt to bring in the spiritual, so the existential humanistic psychology. And so Islamic theories, like we said, is to understand the nafs, the self. And so this requires study of the whole self. And so we have, the fundamental questions such as, where do we come from? What's the purpose of life? What happens after we die? And we hear all of these whenever we attend like majalis or lectures or halaqas, things like that. So we know that, when we talk about the definition here, this is the root right there, which is, for me personally, I find it ironic and somewhat sad and confusing sometimes within the Muslim community why we shy away from the study of psychology. What does the word psychology actually mean? Psyche means self, right? Yeah. So the study of the mind. And so when we take a look at the root definition of Islam, right, when it comes to the word salam, meaning peace, it's that submission. And so I find when I present this to non-Muslims, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Absolutely. And so for us, it's that submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so we know, like we said, in terms of the concept of the nafs and free will, these are all, when we have like a Muslim client who can appreciate this, these are all components in terms of connecting oneself to God, right? And so that's sometimes missing, or a lot of the times missing in the Western psychological theories. So the concept of the nafs, this is the Arabic word that's used in the Quran, and it's translated as the self or the soul, right? Or the spirit. And I started counting well over 100, and I stopped at that. It's mentioned in the Quran, at least double. So it's there. Again, my confusion is, why don't we deal with this? Why don't we talk about this? It's already there in our faith. And so the nafs can be good, can be prone towards good or evil, and can go towards the higher or the lower potentials of the self. And so due to the different possible states of the self, many different types of nafs have been described in the Quran, but there is an agreement amongst scholars, and the Quran has described at least 3 parts. And so these 3 parts are nafs al-ammara bil-su, we hear that in the Quran, the commanding a lower self, nafs al-lawwama, the self-reproaching part, and nafs al-mutma'inna, the peaceful self. Familiar, huh? I'm hearing the murmurs there. So for nafs al-mutma'inna, or rather, nafs al-ammara, the commanding self, we see in the Quran here. And so this part of the self is prone to the lower parts of ourself, right? The lower aspects, representing the negative drives in man, the evil part. And it can be viewed when we look at Freud, who's the famous psychoanalyst, the concept of id. My psych students, remember that, right? So something new for those who don't study psychology. Dr. Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst, although he's been viewed as, oh, this guy's like crazy. So I have to say that to a psychoanalyst. But his theories have been refuted and defuted, but they're fascinating at the same time. And so when we compare it here, this part that he describes is very similar to the part that we have in the Quran that's talking about the lower self. So it can be viewed in terms of the questions of, or comments of, I want to do it now, I don't care if it's right or wrong. That's the part of ourself that just jumps to wanting to do things that are not good. Sounds familiar? We all struggle with that. I mean, you could say, give an example of the part of the nafs when you stayed up late for majlis and you got to get up for fajr. That part of yourself is just not wanting to get up, right? So it's like, go back to bed, it's nice and warm, don't get up, don't get up. Or as we say, what? The shaitan's telling you to do it, right? So nafs al-lawama, I just keep going to mutma'inna because my part is always drawn to doing good. I like the mutma'inna part. So nafs al-lawama, the self-reproaching, again in the Quran is chapter 75, verse 2, corresponds to the self when it becomes aware. Remember the hadith or the ruwayah that we mentioned of Imam Ali earlier, the part of reflects, right? So it's about awareness of the wrongdoing where you feel remorse or guilt. And so this is the first major part of that psycho-spiritual growth, okay? And again, when we compare it to Freudian concepts, it's called the superego. By the way, I'm giving you hints here. You notice I'm giving you hints. So at the end, when I give you the questions of theorists, and I just gave you the answers. So keep it in mind, all right? So this can be a parallel to the superego, and so this is the part of you that reflects and says, ooh, I shouldn't have done that, or why did I do that? I wish, could have, should have, would have, basically. You guys recognize that part of yourself? Give me an example. What have you seen that within yourselves? Oh. Or you see something and you stay silent, right? And we know this from, of course now I forget, but when you the hadith or the riwayah, maybe you guys can help me out. If you don't speak up, you're a part of the oppression, right? Is Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Yes, definitely. So things like that, that part of you that just sits back and doesn't engage or doesn't speak up or stand up. But just within yourself, the reflecting part. So that's a big part of that growth that we're going to get into in a bit. And of course, my favorite one, nafs al-mutma'inna. So nafs al-mutma'inna, the peaceful self, right? The state of inner peace and happiness when you're feeling satisfied and content within yourself. And so this is this desired state that we're always trying to work towards, whether it's through self-discipline, avoidance of acts that can cause us anxiety, remorse, or guilt, right? And so in order to achieve the state, you have to activate that remorseful part. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's really important to note that the nafs, that although, we have these three entities, the nafs is one part. And psychological, spiritual conflicts arise when what happens? When nafs al-ammara is the dominating part, right? Thus preventing us from reaching the goal of the mutma'inna. Conflicts also arise when what? When the lawama is static in awareness, in denial, right? In denial and avoidance of its guilty actions. Therefore, you're not proceeding forward in an attempt to reach that mutma'inna. And so the point here is that the self is always in a dynamic flux, movement, right? So the same person can experience different states within themselves at different times during the day. So this is interesting when we think about personality, mood disorders, and hormones with women, things like that. We're always in that, we make decisions and so based on these things. You know how we joke about don't make decisions in a certain time of month for women? Our hormones change things because you're always in that dynamic influx, right? So you don't want to make big decisions when you're in a state, for all of us, men and women, when you're not in that mutma'inna place. Does that make sense? Because then you live to regret some of these decisions afterwards. Also with the mutma'inna is the concept of jihad and nafs. And we know this is a very popular word in this part of the world that is used completely out of context. So, jihad and nafs, as we know, is the struggle of the self. That word in itself means struggle, right? Especially against the nafs al-ammara, within the nafs al-lawama, to get to the higher state of the nafs al-mutma'inna. So, in essence, what we see here, okay, like the meaning behind these concepts, they're so comprehensive, they're so deep. I'm just skimming the surface here, as we know. There's so many courses in Hawza and Islamic studies courses that describe this in so much detail. So, but here we see how the self struggles in that lawama state and remorse, and how it has to get to the ammara and surrendering itself. And so this is a process. And I see this sometimes with clients when we come in, we're struggling through an issue. It is that process. And so this is the difference between, I would say, Western psychology and Islamic concepts, or Islamic counseling, right? Because we're always, this nafs al-mutma'inna, this part here is always attempting to strengthen its relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to overcome that amara part. So in essence, what is this? This is a journey of the self. It's a beautiful concept, right? The journey of the self to Allah. And this takes place in order to attain that inner peace. And so within this journey, there are choices that we make to get to where we want to go. And we all struggle through this, whether it's, healthy eating, like somebody mentioned, doing the right thing, making decisions where you want to go, live, marry, all of these things. But sometimes it can be just within yourself and your faith. Do I believe? What do I believe? Who am I? What am I? What is the point of all this? What's the point of coming to a majlis, crying and leaving? Like the deeper thoughts of what is the point of this life? So the self is always on this journey to try and understand more to get to that state. And so this leads us to choice, right? Free will and choice. So with that, so we know that in Islam it states that man is free to choose the path that you're on. Therefore, events are not predestined. You guys come across these concepts before? So essentially, willpower rises from within us, and it makes it possible for us to perform or not to perform a certain deed, therefore giving us that freedom of choice. So we are capable of choosing various paths, some of which are consistent with the Islamic aim of life, which is being closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and others which are not. So man is able to create effects in the world by means of the free will, where the capacity to perform is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and choice that we use is from us. Okay? And so when linking all of these concepts together, the implications here are significant. Because, for example, a person who is depressed, all right, the person does not choose to be depressed. But what happens is the depression occurs, and the nafs al-ammara is dominating the nafs al-mutma'inna, therefore preventing that inner peace. That's a big one when we talk about mental health and illnesses related to the nafs like that. The next I want to take a look at is balance, right? So we took a look at the nafs and its three parts. Who can tell me? Pop quiz. What are the three parts? Anybody, shout them out. Mutma'inna, always go to that one first. Lovely. We got the same spirit, you and I. What else? Ammara and lawama. Great. So it's one entity, and they're always in flux depending on what we're encountering with our free will and choice, where we have the choice, not predestined, right? Our lives are not predestined, but we have the choice. The capacity is from, and we have the choice to act upon that, right? So this comes now to the concept of balance, all right? Where, for some reason my notes are all funny today. So balancing the physical and the spiritual parts of the self is very important, as we know in Islam, right? So one should not go to one extreme and emphasizing one aspect at the expense of the other. And so the implications are huge here when we talk about self-development. So again, Western psychology focuses on self-indulgence as a removal of the moral restrictions on people so that they're not repressed, right? And the Islamic model seeks to establish an equilibrium within the physical aspects so that they are neither denied nor overindulged, right? And so the notion of moderation here is related to the concepts of the ideal states of balance, adopting that middle way, which is again, Islam, the middle way of balancing everything. And so by adoption of the middle way, is in the Islamic perspective, thus means, is thus a means to self-development and fulfillment. Does that make sense? So finding that balance, that is where you get that fulfillment. So this way, boundaries, as we believe, determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are not viewed as simply limiting the human self, but as providing parameters within the ultimate inner balance and development can finally take place when following the parameters that Allah has put for us. So we don't want to go to one extreme at the expense of the others. Always about that balance. Keep this concept in mind for the third and final part of our workshop today, when we talk about how we manage our lifestyles with these spiritual concepts. So in terms of the concept of fitra, basically what does that mean? Human nature, right? And so this refers to the primordial state of man, his natural condition and disposition. And so Islam posits that the natural state of man is a positive one, because why? It is of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the defining experience of man in the Islamic perspective is not his physical, but rather his spiritual, right? And so this spiritual aspect is what the Quran, along with the spiritual traditions, appeals to, right? So man is a composite of this, the physiological, the psychological, the mental, and the spiritual component, unaffected materialism or sectarianism. I know, big annoying words. But basically, balance, again, all parts of ourselves, right? So listen to this. This is really fascinating. If early childhood experiences are considered to have a huge impact on an individual's life in terms of memory, how we interact with people, okay, even if it's unconscious, as suggested again by Freud, because he talks a lot about the unconscious, the impact of such an experience going back to an even earlier time would be fundamental. So according to the Islamic point of view, this explains the instinct in all individuals for right and wrong, although some it could be buried deeper than others. And so the spiritual experience is therefore more of a form of recognition rather than discovery. And so that's the idea of the Islamic journey of the self. Let me repeat that. So, as a child, early memories, development, all of that we know has a huge impact on us. But from the Islamic perspective, we go back even further. And we don't see it as a form of discovery, but rather recognition. And so that is the journey of the self. And so what is that journey that we are familiar with? Starts with, again, these are just like points here. These are courses and years of study that we know that people who study Irfan, like Irfan, I forget the English word for it, but the higher levels of thought and theology and spirituality, it's amazing. But this is just the basics here in terms of the journey of the self. So beginning with Allah, in the womb, earthly life, barzakh, which is the interspace where the human being is considered to be the meeting point of the spiritual and the physical and the everlasting. These can really boggle the mind when you sit down and think about it, because we're used to touch, life, world. And we know we've heard this in lectures and whatnot, how life is like a blink of an eye, right? Like, look at you now, 20 years ago, where were you and where are you now? Kind of thing. Like, it just felt like yesterday. And so when you look at this in terms of the journey of the self, that's pretty significant in terms of where you were before and where you're going back to. So I want to get into now taking a look at behavior change and how learning occurs. So through my exploration on Islamic counseling perspective of change, I found this Islamic philosopher. And so he'd already developed a model of change. So Imam Ghazali, he's an Islamic philosopher, theologian from this time frame. He proposed the 6 steps towards change. And so I believe that his model here was developed far beyond his time during that time frame. And that the people of his time, they weren't ready to accept these concepts of change. But when we take a look at this, and we're going to go through detail, I can see that, in fact, this model is timeless. You can use it anytime. And it can be applied to anyone, whatever background, anytime, provided that the person wants to make the changes. And in anything, you can throw out all sorts of, fancy terminology and theories and go to any doctor or spend so much money on therapy for yourself or your child or whomever. But if that person doesn't want to change or accept or deny, it's not going to work. Kun fayakun, right? We know that. If you put that in your mind, you can do it. So it doesn't matter how much effort you put, if you're not going to be ready to do it, it's not going to be done. So the theory here identifies 6 steps that you can take to apply for growth, and it's analogous to a business partnership. And I find this useful when I work with my own clients, when they want to apply to unwanted behavior, let's say, or a thought that is causing them anxiety or distress. So as we go through this right now, what I'd like you to do, okay, is think of something that you have within yourself. Forget other people around you. Let's be real. Let's be aware. Let's reflect. What is something that you would like to change within yourself? You don't need to share this, but if you want to share it, throw it out. Me, my temper. I know I'm very nice right now, but I have a fiery temper, and that's something I always would like to work on. It's one of my weaknesses. What is something, if you feel comfortable sharing it out? Okay. That's a really good one. What could be another one that you would like to work on? That's a really good one. That's something we could all benefit from. Focus and concentration of salah. So think of something that you would like to change within yourself as we go through the next 6 steps, okay? So the first step is with the Arabic word of musharata, to make an agreement or contract, all right? And so the shart, the stipulation, think of what you want changed. The next part is the muraqaba, and the Arabic word of guarding, all right? So through this step, you must meditate before you take action. So this involves the thinking, contemplating, being introspective, and keeping watch over your own self. So you basically function as your own observer to that behavior, okay? Third step is the muhasaba, to evaluate yourself and taking into account, because the word hisab means account. So this step, what does it involve? Self-examination, let's be real, really open up to yourself and take account of your action and continuously keep checking so that you're upholding the contract that you initially made.
So between you're actually keeping a hisab, and the second you're actually just
Observing.
You're just reflecting.
Yes.
That is evaluating.
Like the third, muhasaba is the evaluation, but the second part is you're just observing, you're meditating, you're figuring out, you're being mindful. And the third one is you're actually examining and checking in, and am I holding up the deal at my end, just like you would with another person, you would do that with yourself. It's neat stuff, huh? Yeah, and it's practical. So, mu'aqaba, iqab, aqaba, punish. Don't like negative words, but basically the concept of control here, right? So if we do not honor our own contract to change, we must set some consequences. So I like to use the word consequence here. So what would be a consequence for not upholding the contract of yours? I'm not watching this movie tonight. I didn't finish my homework. Simple one, What could be, just throw a consequence for you, because I don't like the word punishment. But what could be a good consequence for yourself? Oh, I'm not eating that ras malai tonight. I ate too much last night, and I even had some for breakfast this morning. I love that sweet. Not good for my health, right?
How do you punish yourself for something like that?
How do you give a consequence? Change the language. Don't say punish. That's a really good question to give to a scholar, a learned person. I ain't a scholar, but I'll apply what I know with psychology with concentration to begin with. So when we talk about being mindful, it's again with that quote of Imam Ali alayhi salam, with reflection. Like, what do you do when there's something you really want to focus on? I remember years ago I attended this conference in Toronto, and it was a revert conference, and there was a whole workshop on the concentration for salah. And you know what I ended up doing? I went and sat in the back and spoke with a lady I hadn't seen in 5 years. And the whole time, till now, 10 years later, I remember, yes, I do. I remember the workshop, but I don't remember anything from it because I was not listening. And I wish I had, because then I would have given you a good answer. But some of the strategies that I've come across in terms of focus in general is deep breathing, and this is what we do in meditation, like focusing your eye, like relaxing, and we'll do an activity later on. But basically, using your body and your mind together To focus is very powerful. So deep breathing, looking at something and just keeping your mind there. And each time a thought comes, slap it away, slap it away. It's almost like you have to do this, like physically, you know? So in salah, you have the turba in front of you. That's your focus right there. What is this turba? Like you can tell yourself that before you even begin. That's why we have all these, and you've heard stories of one imam I remember, I think Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, where he'd be crying even before attempting to go to salah because of who he's standing in front of. So reminding yourself things like that, you know.
Like my question is, how do you punish yourself? That's my question. I understand like there's ways that you can
Now this is,
that step.
let me rephrase. He uses the word punish. I don't like using that because I don't think negative reinforcement gets the positive result. I put his theory there. My interpretation and how I believe it can be applied positively is using the word, what is a consequence that I can give myself if I don't uphold my agreement? So for salah, this I think requires a little bit of tricky. It's like, what consequence can you give yourself if you haven't focused well in your salah? You do it again. Do another one. You weren't satisfied with that, especially if you are working on this to self-develop yourself spiritually. I do that sometimes. What did I say during my prayer? Have you heard of the joke of the prayer? I lost my keys. I'm gonna go pray. So bad. Get it? Because while you're praying, you're thinking about other stuff. So bad. So that joke, I think, has a lot of depth to it. So then what do? You go back and you pray and you really try to focus again. So that's a little trick right there. Okay. So, mu'aqaba, even though they use the word aqaba for punishment, let's rephrase that. I think maybe this is, back then perhaps that worked for them, but now, I think nowadays, positive reinforcement works better. So use the word consequence. Set yourself a consequence. Okay, so the next one is mujahada. We know this is from the word jahad, effort, right? So in this step, what's going on? We know some of this now. We know some of this with the self. What's going on with the different parts of the self? Nafs al-ammara, right, is fighting here, right? And its inclinations, it's going towards that, right? So this is the stage of continuous and consistent struggle to overcome your nafs. And this is the important part and step, like we said, where that change can occur with jihad and nafs, okay? Finally, we have the mu'ataba, to rebuke. So ataba, to repent within yourself. So in this step, if you have not maintained the contract, we make the effort to turn around, regret, or change, or correcting, or recognizing your error. And so this is where responsibility comes into place, and choice to learn from this setback to improve for the next time you do this again. Does that make sense? Amara is when you're going for it and you're doing it. But the lawama is fighting the amara to get to that part. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go through these quickly again through this model here. So you see the contract with yourself. You set up even your consequences there, whatever behavior that you want to work on. Then you have the guarding of yourself, so you are your observer here, right? Then you're your evaluator in terms of, all right, checking in, am I doing this? Am I upholding the contract? Yep. So you see how this becomes a business partnership as well, right? And then you have your consequences where you give to yourself. Again, you're not punishing, you're setting your consequences. Then you're working through that, the effort to overcome that part of yourself. This is where that spiritual development and growth occurs. And then finally, you have that part at the end where you're returning and you're trying to apply and repent. Make sense? It's a pretty neat concept, huh? Now I know with Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, we have so much wealth and information, and I'm still working on trying to find the sciences there behind and the psychology and all these beautiful hadith and practical tips, you could say. And so more research that I am doing now is research that I do for lectures. So if you guys want, I'm actually doing a lecture tonight at Masjid al-Rasul, where I take or work with hadiths and ayahs from the Quran and cross-reference and analyze them with modern Western psychology. And so I have a really good lecture tonight on the psychology of development and knowledge And so we'll be using that. So I highly encourage you to come. I really like that lecture. I'm excited about it. So I'm trying to instill the excitement with you. But this is the kind of research that I'm doing more now when it comes to Islamic concepts, because we have so much. And it's time that we take the knowledge that we have of Ahlul Bayt and apply it to modern practical ways within our lives from a psychological perspective. All right, so let's take a look now at, in terms of goals for treatment, and we're doing well in terms of time because, like I said, this is the heavy part of the lecture. So the goals of treatment, when we look at the Islamic counseling, presents itself from a therapeutic as well as a spiritual. So again, we are emphasizing spirituality, right? So from a therapeutic perspective here, the goal doesn't necessarily have to be happiness. I have people come into therapy and I'm like, what are your goals for counseling? And they tell me, I want to be happy. I look at them like, get out of my office, No, I don't say that. But in my head, I'm like, well, we're all looking for happiness, contentment of our spirit, right? So from a therapeutic point of view, it's not happiness, but acceptance of reality and strengthening coping mechanisms to deal with the challenges. So this is common, like I said, in my work, and especially with Muslim students when we talk about spirituality. So there's also the moral and the ethical issues that should not be avoided when we do counseling. And this is what I encourage therapists who are of non-Muslim background. It's okay to talk about these things, but then they might themselves, the therapist might not feel well equipped because they're not Muslim or don't know Islamic theories, but then they're also trained in cross-cultural therapy. So not necessarily a concept like Islamic concepts, but they're trained in cultural therapy, which allows them to delve into the major concepts like that. Okay, so this in itself will create a healthy relationship, I find, and a trusting relationship between the therapist and the client when we have that basic understanding. And so like I said, this can be a problem when we're looking at people from the Muslim community going to get counseling support and vice versa, where the therapist may feel they're not well equipped to provide that therapy. So from a spiritual point of view, the goal of therapy is harmony within the self. So according to Dr. Salma Yaqub, so she's a British Muslim psychotherapist and a social activist, and she talks about goals of therapy in terms of achieving harmony within the self by optimally balancing various aspects of the self through what? Self-awareness, of differing influences, so the social, the cultural, family influences, so that will lead to that state within and without, the state of Islam. So the spiritual integration, it coordinates the whole person, and integration implies the coordination of the entire system around one goal. What is that goal again? Submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what's lacking in the Western psychological theories, right? So the spiritual values impart a sense of meaning and a direction of life, and this perspective, again, it strings a thread of meaning and purpose for us, okay, through the different challenges that we do experience. Sorry, I put all this up there. Okay. You guys following along so far? You guys find this interesting, or is it just me who's so excited about all this? It's really interesting. Why? Again, I go back to the point of why are we so afraid of psychology and mental health when our own faith teaches us this? It's all there, right? So when we take a look at treatment and techniques and the Muslim therapeutic traditions, what's the main thing? And we joked about this earlier, right? Oh, you go to a sheikh and they tell you to read and all that. However, there is so much science behind reading and listening to the Quran, right? So since there's a lot of emphasis when it comes to choice, like we said, and in Islamic, like what I'm theorizing or putting it out there for clients as well as therapists, is that concept of choice for the client to improve the quality of life. They decide how they want to take this, right? And so this would be inherent in the form of treatment. And so our traditions focus on spirituality and self-development, like we said, so through reading the Quran. So we know the Quran itself is not only a guide of principles, but we know it's a source of healing for us when recited or listened to. And as it reaches the nafs, I always point here for some reason. Where do you guys point, by the way, to yourself when you talk about the nafs? Everybody's different. The heart, that's how it's this area, right? So yeah, it's interesting how we do that. So it opens up the heart and the mind to meditate. So in other words, it's spiritually uplifting. Usually at this point in the presentation to my non-Muslim audiences, I will open up some ayahs from the Quran. I'll get them to sit and do the meditative relaxation stuff, and then turn on some really good Quran, some of my favorite reciters. Who are your favorite reciters? I love Minshawi, yeah, Tablawi, the old school Egyptians. But there's such beautiful art in there, the way that they recite, right? So we're not going to do it, but you guys can imagine what it sounds like when it takes you out there, because I'll do it for a good 5 minutes and let them, then you see them, they're just relaxing after, you know? So it's amazing to see. Now what's interesting here is that research has shown this, right? That in times of distress, anger, frustration, or depression, the Quran can give the nafs the peace it's searching for. And amazing that modern psychological research has proven once again that what we have known 1400 years ago. Amazing. So yeah, there's the link right there. I found this young reciter who's quite something. You guys want to hear it quickly? No, I forget the name at the top of my head. What's his name? So is there, yeah, there's Wi-Fi access here. I don't know if it'll show up. Watch it be a commercial. And of course. Gotcha. You don't have volume on your laptop?
Because this is plugged in.
So we're not going to hear it. So here's this new reciter. His name is Omar Hisham Al-Arabi. So if you guys want to check him out, I just found his stuff amazing for some reason. A new style. It's a bit different, but it's just so spiritually. Reminds me of Abu Dhar Halawaji, how he just lifts you up. So this is really a really great resource to listen to in terms of different styles of Quran. You guys hear it? That's so cool. Do you hear it? Do you hear it though? Very lightly. Okay, let's listen. Do you get the gist of it, huh? Yeah. So check him out. It's fascinating. His name? Awesome. Thanks. I don't even remember that. Mm-hmm. So here's a practice for you. When you want to combine meditation with Quran, find this guy or your favorite reciter, do some deep breathing ahead of time, okay, to relax physiologically. Sit down in a relaxing state, loosen the muscles, and just breathe in. Maybe you could do this before you want to do salah as well, right? Or anything that you want, focus and concentration. And do the deep breathing, and then listen. And just let this part of you just be lifted up. Guaranteed afterwards, when you're in a state of frustration or anger, you've gone in a fight with somebody, you're really upset, just do this and you will notice the benefits of that. And then people ask you, how did you relax like that? I listen to Quran. It's got healing powers. And this is how you can benefit that way when you listen to the words and the voice. It lifts you up. Incredibly powerful. So then there's dua, supplications, right? And so similarly, just like the Quran, this is also shown to have therapeutic benefits. So we know there are supplications written in many books, for example, Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, Mafatih al-Jinan. This is the direction that we turn to when we want to find spiritual uplifting through all of this. So yes, we do them, we read different du'as on different days of the week. Yes, we read du'as different parts of the day of our salah. Yes, we read different du'as, again, for different reasons. I ask you to be mindful. The next time you listen to a du'a or a ziyarah, go to the spiritual depths of this, because if you just read for the sake of reading it, you're not going to benefit from it. A lot of people say, well, how do I feel more spiritual? Reading the Quran, du'as and all that. Like, no, you can't just like open up and read it right away. Like, you really have to work mind and body and put yourself in that reflective state to get to that full spiritual benefit. And we know this when reading the ziyarah, and those of us who has attended ziyarah, who has gone on the ziyarah. So you know what I'm talking about, like when you go and you experience that, right? Inshallah, you'll get the opportunity to go again. It's a whole other world in life, right? How you open up yourself to that. Here's a challenge for you. Why don't you apply that to every part of your life and everything that you do? How much more satisfied and mutma'inna is yourself going to be? This is what we meant earlier by finding that spiritual balance and applying that, because Islam is that middle pathway of encompassing all of that. Why are we only spiritual during Muharram? Why are we only spiritual in Ramadan or in different parts of the year? Why are we not spiritual in our salat every day, in our actions, how we interact and speak with each other? People always want to know, how do I become more spiritual? How can I have more depth in my life? How can I feel it more? How can I feel it? And this is a problem when people come in and they are dealing with depression and anxiety. Like, I don't feel it. What's the point of me praying? I don't feel it. Yeah, I've heard that. And I've had to sit there and talk about, all right, let's take care of this part. Let's leave salah for now for a second. Let's work on this, and that. Somebody with a broken leg, I always use that analogy. They come in and they can't pray. Obviously, right? The way they were before. So what do you do with a broken leg? You try and work on placing it, structuring it, casting it. Takes time to heal. In the meantime, what's their prayer going to be like? It's going to be adjusted. Again, use that analogy. Your spiritual self is going to be adjusted until you've reached that full potential of yourself where you can walk normal again, so to speak. You get it? Yeah. And so this is what happens when you're trying to do salah and the duties and the things that we are responsible for in front of Allah. It's all about that mercy, huh? So, actual salah, there we go. So, in terms of the salah, we know the benefits of that. By the way, when I presented the other one, I actually did put a Abu Dhar Halawaji. You guys saw that one? Down that, where is it? Yeah, down there. I put the supplication of light. Maybe we'll hear it again. You guys get the gist of it. You know what it's like. Again, I asked them to sit down and relax and take their, they were just melting off the chairs by the time we finished listening to that dua. So when it comes to salah, in itself, like we were saying, the obligatory prayer throughout the day has its significance in terms of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Quran in itself recounts the name of God that will bring the serenity to the hearts, right? So the praise of prayer in itself, in the self-development of man, is given such prominence that even in the adhan, the call for prayer, right? The words, come to falah. What does the word falah mean? Success, right? So being successful, this is included in the adhan before the salah. So this shows you what? That self-development can be attained through your prayer. Why am I telling you all of this? Again, we know we have to pray, we do it, we've been taught and trained since we were kids to the point that when we miss salah, we're late or we're busy, we almost feel that sense of guilt a little bit, right? That when your parents did a good job of beating that and training, no, I don't mean beating, but just really training you with that, you will feel that guilt, right? But that's not the point of why we're praying. We're not feeling it, feeling guilty when missing it, although that is a form, again, of the development. But the prayer in itself is supposed to give us that, and that's why it's prescribed from the ultimate healer for us, because it gives us the opportunity of coming to that place of success through the self-development. And for the salah, what I presented to them was the adhan by Abu Dhar. I like his voice, can you tell? And because it's so spiritually uplifting, mashallah. And so we went through the adhan. And you know, for non-Muslims, there's a lot to be said about the adhan when they first hear it. I'm sure you've seen those videos where the non-Muslims will hear the adhan and they're quite shocked, or they'll hear it from space, or somebody visiting a Muslim country and you'll hear like 10 mosques going off at once, right? It's fascinating, their response to it. And I got to see that in front of me with my colleagues. But again, for us, we take it for granted because it's so part of our daily lives that we just forget about it when we just say Allahu Akbar, and just try to hit that turbo and get out of there quickly. And we miss the point that Allah prescribed it for us as a place of self-development and growth. So if you can take anything out of these three things that we already know and look at it from a different point of view, I think we've done a good job of giving ourselves natural Islamic therapeutic strategies and coping, And so what's interesting further about the salah, okay, so follow along with this. So the whole prayer, as we know, is a most solemn and serious affair during which the worshipper does not turn the attention to anything else, nor does he indulge in any movement which should distract the attention or disturb the prayerful attitude. The prayer is thus an undisturbed meditation to the divine and on the divine. And it is for this reason that prayer is accompanied by the recitation of the Holy Quran, speaking of divine love, mercy, power, and knowledge. And the Islamic mode of worship, as we know, the movement, right, is calculated to concentrate attention on one object, the realization of divine presence, and the ablution, the wudu, preceding the prayer, the reverential attitude in standing, the bowing down, the kneeling with the forehead placed on the ground, and the reverent sitting posture, all of these, they all help the mind to realize the divine presence as a fact, and the worshipper, as it were, finds the heart's joy in doing honor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not only with his recitation of the words, but with the whole body. And this is how you adopt that spiritual, that reverential attitude. I wanted to ask you more about prayer. What form of exercise or meditation is it common to that these days is just very yoga? And science has also, looking further into this, the research has shown, okay, that there's a lot of it's a lot of the psychomuscular skeletal, all of that. There's so much to it. I read this one research, I don't remember the name of it exactly, but it talked about, again, the psychological benefits of prayer, and it looked at the muscles, it looked at how the brain and the hormones that were released at the same time and what was going on within the body and the brain. And it was fascinating to see, again, how they compared it to yoga and just, different types of meditation. We, again, have had this for 1,400 years. And if we look before that, the other religions, they also had different forms of prayer that also had the same benefits. But Islam has its special form of prayer. And now it's being compared to yoga and all of that. And it's like, hey, hold on a second. We've had this for 1,400 years. And again, we take it for granted. So I'd like you to think about salah now in a different way from the psychological for having good mental health in this way. Okay? So, are these the only techniques? The Quran, the du'as, and salah? Now, as strong as the implications are that we already looked at, this still remains, there still remains many of those who have emotional disturbances, right? Even though we do this as Muslims, there's still people who still deal with a lot of illnesses, right? So one possible way I thought it was because I find that perhaps there needs to be more comprehension about salah in ways like this. Like I just scratched the surface with this, right? But I feel there should be more education on salah, and not the typical way the Maulanas do on the Mambar, because like you have to pray and you have to do it like this and this and that. No, I'm talking the deeper, beautiful stuff, like the spiritual ways of doing it, right? And I'm just looking at the audience right now, like your faces, just the way your demeanor, your body is so much different than when we first started, especially when we started talking about these things, right? Because you really connect with it. And so most Muslims are knowledgeable, like we're saying, about this, how to perform them. We were raised this way, but the lack of understanding and the benefits. And I'm not talking about the benefits of, if you do the salah, you will get thawab. In here, out there, yeah, I know we get thawab for it. But then what? What about the thawab? What about the spiritual part of it, the aspect, right? And I think you can really get that if we have more education of people who are getting into this field and really making the connection. In informal or formal type of communications, lectures, seminars, and teaching people young. Even teaching our children when we talk about salah, like doing, breathing and relaxation and approaching salah in a different way, I think can really create that love within our children's prayer instead of, get off the video games, it's time to pray. By the way, have you heard of the joke of the mom that goes into the room and says, Fajr, what did she say? You guys know which joke I'm talking about? It's like, it's burning, or there's fire, there's fire. You're going to hell, you haven't prayed, or something like that. Have you heard of that joke? I'm so bad at jokes sometimes, I just destroyed it. But you get the gist of it, right? Like, there's a fire. Where in hell, where you're going to go? You're not praying. There we go, I think I got it. You're instilling fear. You're instilling fear in your child. That's not going to work. They don't understand the concept of hell or fire. Instead of using that energy, why don't we get them to bed early? In this community, get them to bed early. And instill that love, that spirituality, so that when you approach the prayer and you are the model for them, they are watching you. Your children are watching you. I'll give you an example. Last week, we attended the majlis for Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And so the women are completely segregated from the men, and they were listening to the Maulana. It was all good, and he's such an amazing Maulana, but I kept giving dirty looks to people because he was so great. I went just to listen to him in the majlis. Afterwards, when they did the latam, and like I said, I was so impressed with how you do it here, the women did not get up, and that's why I was asking one of the sister, wow, you guys all get up here. They didn't. They just sat down and started gossiping. My daughter was with me, and I'm just watching these women. I just kept looking. I didn't care. I got up. I was the only person in the room who got up. Ottawa, if you're watching, you know exactly which center I'm talking about. I got up. I didn't care. I just started doing the latam. Kids were running around. Women were gossiping. Even my mother was looking at them, and she was watching me. She knew that Barak attack temper was going to blow. But I kept it cool because I'm at the majlis for the imam. But they kept talking and gossiping, and I just kept looking, just looking. My daughter, I didn't tell her. She came next to me and started doing it. I'm in the middle of a latam. I started smiling. And I was just so humbled and overwhelmed. And yes, you're there crying for the imam, but at the same time, my tears came down and my daughter was watching me, and she just came and did it. And I said it, and I didn't care who said it. My daughter is better than all of you here. And I meant it in a spiritual way. That this child was watching an adult, her parent, and she saw everybody else was sitting and talking. She saw that and she copied it. SubhanAllah, wallah SubhanAllah. I was crying for that. I was amazed. And your children are watching everything you do. Amazing. The good and the bad. My daughter doesn't wear hijab yet. But she tells me, I want to wear the hijab when I go to school. Alhamdulillah, she goes to an Islamic school, so there's no issues with that. But again, it's the modeling that we do. It's so important. And that's why I'm saying with salah, if we can somehow get the message out in a different way, I think we ourselves will be more encouraged to be able to concentrate more and have that spiritual uplifting, but then teach the younger ones instead of, there's a fire, you're going to hell, you're burning, It doesn't work. It's negative reinforcement. It's punishment, consequence. You want to do positive stuff. All right. So when it comes to guidelines, it's the Islamic guidelines for resources for the mind, the body, and the emotions. Dr. Salma Yaqub again, she talks about, this is more, I guess, for therapists, but just for you, if any of you do go see a therapist, just so you have an understanding of what kind of treatment you could be getting or therapy in terms of the mind, the body, and the emotion. So when we want to work with the mind, what we're doing here is we're looking at challenging maladaptive thoughts, so negative thoughts, right? How many of us always have negative thoughts of thinking the worst of people, or going to a dark area, or dhann, right? Like just always just negative thinking. It's not gonna work, I'm horrible, I'm such a loser, oh, that person this or that. Like we always have these negative thoughts, right? All or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, overanalyzing, underanalyzing, or, you know, all of these thoughts. We have these maladaptive thoughts. When you're stressed, what happens? These thoughts become amplified, right? They become very amplified. And so when we look at cognitive behavioral techniques, this is what we're looking at to help work with challenging the maladaptive negative thoughts. When we're looking at body, we want to challenge, again, negative learned behavior. We looked at one model today, right? The 6 steps of the contract. And so this is, again, using behavioral techniques to therapy. And finally, with emotions, we want to explore, we want to process and identify unresolved issues. Could be from childhood, memories, or, you know, with a bad relationship. Relationships could also mean parent, friends, not necessarily just a spouse. And so when we use centered approach or the psychodynamic from a therapeutic point of view, this is how we work with emotions. This is like psychological jargon. All right. So just with that, a little bit further to that, when we talked about comparing Western psychology, where the spiritual is not there that much, and when we talk about the Islamic, where the spiritual is, this is where we have the strength, right? When we talked about the client having the choice in terms of what kind of therapy that they want to do, or they want to work on Salah or Quran or whatever, right? So there's a strength in the Islamic counseling because the Western therapies involve the therapist suggesting or prescribing a technique because they are the professional, right? So again, like I was saying earlier, the therapist doesn't necessarily have to have an Islamic background, but having these concepts understood and using the cross-cultural, that can be very beneficial. And also for the client who is not seeing the Muslim client to understand that it still can be beneficial when you apply that, all right? So finally here, let's take a look. Those who've been paying attention, and those people who are on their phones over there, no, yes, you know? So we're gonna do a bit of our comparisons. You guys definitely know this one by now. When we look at the Islamic concept of nafs al-ammara, al-mutma'inna al-lawama, which theorists are we looking at again? Yeah, and the id, the ego, and the superego, okay? The contract technique by Imam Ghazali, I don't know if you've heard of the theorist. Let's try with our psych students here. Could you guys recognize what this could be compared to? Any of the theorists that you come across? There's a psychologist by the name of Robert Ellis. So in Western psychology, he worked with the contract technique. And so when we talk about free will, choice, existentialism, so the psychology of the whole, it encompasses everything. My psych students, can you give me some names? I'm going to be sending letters to your professors. Do you remember any theorists? So there's Dr. Viktor Frankl and Dr. Rollo May. Let me tell you about Viktor Frankl and why you should know who this person is. You know Sayyid Hussein Makki? He talks a lot about him as well. The reason being why we like him so much, and Hussein Makki is very spiritual, he likes talking about this stuff. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish Holocaust survivor. He was taken to the concentration camps and he did his own study. Each time he would write things down though, they would take away his studies and rip them apart, but he just kept going. And what he observed was fascinating. He noticed that the people who survived the concentration camps were the ones who had a reason or meaning to live. See the connection already? So, those who suffer find meaning in suffering, find meaning in love, and find meaning with God. These are the ones that survived. They did not wither away inside there. He wrote a whole book called, I can see you're about to write it down, and I forgot it. Astaghfirullah. What's fascinating about Viktor Frankl is that he inspired me in my second year personality psych class. And I just connected with his ideas, and I went and did a whole research on him. And I said, when I get to my graduate studies, I'm going to develop this further. But then I told you guys, my professor said, no, you're not doing that. You're doing this. And I was like, oh, I had all this research. No, I started scratch. But he really talked about, astaghfirullah, I forgot the name of it. I know it because I studied it. Man's Search for Meaning. That's what the book is called. If you guys want to have a good read about spirituality and how to work and survive through a struggle, Man's Search for Meaning. Fascinating stuff. And so he was amongst the fathers of existentialism, and he talked about free choice and all that. But he talks about the whole he developed logotherapy. And so that's, again, encompassing different parts of the self and spirituality into healing and therapy. Fascinating stuff. Finally, we have integrated psychology and awareness. My psych students, you guys come across this before? No? Gestalt therapy. This guy's really cool. You know what he does? I'll show you what he does. Can I have a chair? So he will put an interesting form of therapy here. So he will put, it's called the empty chair method, okay? So he will put the person there, the client, and then he will tell them, this is the issue. This is the person you have the problem with. This is your struggle. So it's almost using visual, and I do that a lot in my therapy. So you have that person, the thing, whatever is bothering you, go for it. Let it all out. And he's harsh. If you look up Gestalt and look at his theories and how he works, it's fascinating how he does that. Amazing because it's using awareness and using the mind and the body and just integrating it all. And so you're getting out the emotions, you're getting it all out. There's almost a cathartic release at the end, when you're doing all of that. So this guy's really interesting if you want to look him up, Gestalt. And so this is, again, what we have in our Islamic counseling theories when we want to encompass the whole, when we talk about reflection and awareness and all of that. So, to finish up, what we looked at today. So this is a good summary. So the implications for this presentation are as clear as the justifications of why I did this research to begin with. The problem that we started off with, the statement of that there's a lack of development for Islamic counseling theories and practice for Muslim clients and as well as for the Muslim and non-Muslim therapists to learn and apply for the clients. So what I looked at was already existing knowledge that we have in our faith, right? We know all of this. And so we want to synthesize that, and I wanted to do that in a proposal for theories and practice, these theories into a form of practice. And so that I hope that what we looked at today makes a lot of sense for you guys for that, right? So we took a look at all of these concepts here, like we said, in terms of the definition, submission, the nafs and its different parts, free will and choice, balance and development in terms of Islam being the middle way, fitra, recognition rather than discovery, how behavior change occurs through that model, the circular model there, and then finally in terms of the different goals of treatment that we looked at with salah, dua, supplications, and then treatment techniques at the end. So if you guys have any questions, I know, like I said, this was a heavy one, but alhamdulillah, we got through it pretty well, wouldn't you say? Yeah, we connected with these ideas. So yeah, you have any questions? You guys just want to go have those sandwiches right now. I know. Well, we need to have the food to nourish our mind, right? Any questions about this? It's pretty neat, though, that a non-Muslim audience was really receptive to this, and this is things that I apply in my daily work with Muslim as well as, let's say, people of other faiths who want to encompass spirituality into their self-development and growth when it comes to sessions. All right, so if there No questions? Inshallah, we'll stop, take a quick break. And the last one's going to be fun because we're going to apply everything that we have learned into how to create balance and manage stress in our daily lives. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Oh, thank you. I don't know why